Hello, and welcome to HSPM 719 Research Methods. I'm Rick Cates, and I'm going to talk to you about Pecha Kucha and secondary data sets. So why all of a sudden is Pecha Kucha a hot topic in our department? I checked online and found that Pecha Kucha was started by two Tokyo-based architects that used this technique during design presentations to rein in the wordiness of the speakers. 20 slides for 20 seconds per slide. Some of your HSPM professors will be sharing a PowerPoint template that has a 20-second timer at the bottom of the slides. This will stress out some of us. You're talking too much. You're not talking fast enough. So on a more relaxed note, another slide talked about Pecha Kucha in terms of Dude's Law. So I drew you a picture of an informative dude. Dude's Law stresses the value of the practice, emphasizing the why over the how. I gave you the how, 20 slides at 20 seconds a slide. So why use Pecha Kucha? You'll have a clear and more concise presentation without any blah 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 just reading off the slides. Okay, that was a little over a minute for 3 slides, which means I'm talking too much or I'm not talking fast enough for the 20-second pace. Okay, let's get started on secondary data. I'm going to talk about BRFSS, or Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System. The BRFS is a CDC database that tracks health risks in the United States. The data is collected from phone surveys. The BRFSS is the largest telephone survey in the world, consisting of 3 parts: the core, the optional module, the state added questions. I'll talk a little bit about South Carolina later in the presentation, so let's take a closer look. So, why is this important to you? As a future healthcare leader and policymaker, it behooves you to have a greater understanding of this data set to make informed decisions. Let's go through an example in Section 1 on health status. So, here's an example of the standardized questionnaire. For Section 1, Question 1, would you say that in general your health is excellent, very good, good, fair, or poor? And the person on the other end of the phone answers and makes a self-assessment of their health at that time. As I mentioned earlier, you can look at state-specific data and particular questions that the state asks their applicants. You go to State Information, click on your state. In this particular case, it takes you to the South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control, who administer and house the data for South Carolina. To illustrate, I downloaded the information from the South Carolina DHEC site into Excel for the first question on how would you rate your health. And as you can see, the males were 18.3 and for females 18.1 as rating themselves as excellent in health. Also, if you look further on down the page there, you can see a nice example of the social gradient. So, what specific questions did South Carolina ask? The ones I found interesting were about fish. For example, during the past 12 months, on average, how often did you eat sport-caught fish? Or, which group of sport-caught fish did you eat the most? These type of questions could benefit health as well as economic research. There are some excellent resources under prevalence data and data analysis tools. I would recommend reviewing all 6 resources. Let's take a look at interactive maps. This tool allows you to customize maps to illustrate comparisons of health indicators. For this example, I reviewed the data for respondents whose height and weight put them in the obese category for BMI. Notice that South Carolina is one of the bottom states in the dark rust color. A well-incorporated map can be a nice addition to your research paper. So, with all the positives, what are some of the disadvantages? The BRFS database relies on land-based telephone surveys. We all know that many people have moved to cell phones completely. This in itself can introduce bias. Another disadvantage is the survey is based on self-reported data from the respondents, which can be very subjective. An advantage of this secondary data set is that it uses a standardized protocol where each respondent is asked the exact same question, which makes the data cleaner. Also, as noted in Chapter 5 in our Research Methods book, research-oriented datasets are generally collected according to a strict scientific procedures of sampling and measurement. According to the reading in the experimental and quasi-experimental designs, many novice researchers struggle with calculating the proper sample size. This can be simplified by using a well-designed secondary data set like we've talked about. Look at this picture. Think about how difficult it would be to pick out a sample so that all the major population variations are adequately represented. Another example of using a secondary data set like CDC's BRFSS is their use of data weighting. Data weighting reduces the potential of bias and increases the representativeness of the estimates. The first citation I want to share with you is on the BRFSS site under Publications and Resources. It's entitled CDC's Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. The most recent report, which addresses chronic disease, is very thorough with 116 references. Surprising, when I looked it up on Google Scholar, it had only been cited twice. The next article I reviewed was from MOCDAD. In comparison, this article had been cited 2,279 times. What I found interesting is that MOCDAD and his colleagues immediately pointed out that they use self-reported data to calculate the body mass index, which can actually avoid questions as to the validity of their data. The third article I read was a more narrowly focused article from a diabetes journal. The study described and compared healthcare access and utilization of Hispanic American adults along the U.S. and Mexican border. Following the recommendations in the chapter readings, I tried to replicate the data and was able to pull out the information for El Paso using the secondary database. Well, I'm at the end of the line and my time is up. Let me say, the timing for the new presentation method is tough and will take some practice. The takeaway for using secondary data: the advantages certainly outweigh the disadvantages, especially for a young PhD student going through the dissertation process.